medications with alcohol or other drugs, you increase your risk of addiction, overdose, and even death. You need to think twice before you take someone else's prescription meds, and never share your meds with others.
A message from the San Juan County Partnership, 505-566-5867.
Hello everyone, my name is Mick Hess, your host for Roving with the Arts here on KSJE 90.9. Please join me every weekday starting at 9 a.m. for the chance to hear full-length, unabridged opera, ballet, symphonic, and chamber music. I'll share news of local concert events that you may be interested in attending, background information about some of the greatest musical compositions ever written. Tune in weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. and Wednesday from 9 to 10:30.
KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center, here to meet your urgent and emergent medical needs, whether they are COVID-19 related or not. Medical emergencies happen when you least expect them. Whether it's a stroke, heart attack, illness, or injury, San Juan Regional Medical Center's caregivers are here to provide care to you and your loved ones. Find out more online at sanjuanregional.com. Minutes past 8 o'clock. It's Thursday morning, March the 4th, 2021. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Michlin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE. 90.9 FM over the air here in San Juan County, New Mexico. 103.3 FM over the airwaves in Durango, Colorado, and streaming everywhere on Earth from our website, ksje.com. Welcome also to our viewers who are watching our visual radio program. It is streaming live this morning to the KSJE Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and the KSJE Twitter account. So we're glad that you are with us as well, however you found your way to us this morning. Because coming up in the next few moments, a great conversation with my guest Paul Reed about some of the recent discoveries involving Stonehenge in Great Britain. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that and much, much more coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE. Of course, Paul works with Archaeology Southwest and Salmon Ruins, so stay tuned for that coming up in the next few moments right here on KSJE. Then, of course, next hour, streaming at 9 a.m. and on the radio this afternoon at 5 p.m. It is our COVID-19 Community Information Program, and I hope you'll stay tuned for that and join me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll be talking about the vaccine rollout here in San Juan County and, of course, throughout New Mexico, and the guests on the program today include Mike Mestis, the San Juan County Emergency Manager. Laura Ann Crawford will be joining us. She is the Northwest Region Director with Presbyterian Medical Services. And, of course, Rita Aboud will be here from the New Mexico Department of Health office here in San Juan County. So stay tuned for that. Again, streaming at 9 a.m. live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And, of course, you can listen to the program on the radio this afternoon at 5:06 p.m. on KSJE. And it's also on KNMI Radio at noon today. So you can check it out there as well. On the radio at 9, Mick Hess is going to take us roving with the arts. He's playing some music from Robert Schumann today, composer Schumann, and today it's featuring his 4th Symphony. That's on Roving with the Arts, our weekday classical music program today at 9:06 on KSJE. Don't forget, of course, we invite you to connect with us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're a social media person, you can check out KSJE on all of those places as well. Let's talk about the weather forecast. Outside right now, it's 34 degrees here in Farmington at KSJE Studios. Some rain sprinkles, I would say, on my way into work this morning. And, of course, we tell you that visual radio can take you places. Why don't we head up to the top of the Wolf Creek ski area this morning, where the sun is just trying to peek through the clouds with some snow in the air at Wolf Creek ski area. Right now, by the way, at Wolf Creek, it is 17 degrees with snow, and they are having cloudy conditions, as you can see, but they are on their way to a high today of a big 17 degrees. I'm sorry, a big 20 degrees at Wolf Creek, and an overnight low of 12 degrees today at Wolf Creek, but probably some pretty decent ski conditions despite some of the wind that they're getting at the top of the summit there at Wolf Creek ski area. Back here at home today, we are expecting a mostly cloudy day today in Farmington with some scattered rain showers. The high today 49 in Farmington. Those winds will be kicking up here as well. Clearing though overnight with a low of 27, and then tomorrow the sunshine returns and warmer temperatures, 60 degrees for a high on Friday. Clear and 33 on Friday night, then high of 64 with sunshine on Saturday. Look at that, 67 for a forecast high for Sunday and Monday, and then back down to the lower 60s on Tuesday and maybe lower 50s and some more showers in the forecast for next Wednesday. Well, let me turn to my guest who is joining me this morning. Always great to have him on the program with me. Paul Reed, as I mentioned, from Salmon Ruins and Archaeology Southwest, joining me remotely from his home. Paul, good morning. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Scott. So glad to be back.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned this morning, you sent along a couple of articles about Stonehenge, which even after all these years, I think still fascinates a lot of us because there's just so much mystery about it. It's such an interesting place, and I've never been there, but I look forward to visiting there one day. But there's just a lot to maybe learn about Stonehenge, and probably a lot that we still don't know about Stonehenge, correct?
That's right, because one of the points is that what you see on the surface really is just a fraction of what's in the area. So one of the things they've found with some recent work, which isn't what we were really going to talk about today, but it's really interesting, is with some test excavations, lots of people have been buried in and around different points around Stonehenge. So it does really reinforce the ceremonial importance of it. During what we call the Neolithic period in England.
Right, very interesting. And of course, I asked you before we came on the air this morning because, of course, the shape of at least the Stonehenge that we are familiar with, that round circle of these gigantic stones and things that were obviously placed there for a specific purpose, if that had any relationship to maybe some of the round buildings that we see in the ruins in our area, thinking of Salmon, Aztec, Chaco, and things like that, even Mesa Verde, but obviously two different periods of history. And you were telling me that just human beings being human beings, they migrate to these types of shapes, huh?
Right. And the round forms really are sort of the oldest ones that we're aware of worldwide. So, a lot of archaeologists tend to think of those as sort of the original building plan, essentially in a circle. And of course, we see square buildings and other angled buildings at different points in time. But, humans share, those of us alive on the planet now, and certainly in recent millennia, share a very close genetic history, because looking further back in time, there have been different bottlenecks that paleoanthropologists have studied, where it looks like a portion of the worldwide population, may have died out for different reasons. And then, humans sprang from a couple of points and then repopulated the planet. So this suggests, and really the DNA work does as well, that we are very closely related, the humans on the planet today and those in the fairly recent past. So we tend to solve problems, how to build houses to live, what we're going to eat, how we're going to clothe ourselves. There's certainly a lot of interesting variation in different places around the planet, certainly influenced by environment and climate. But, we seem to be hardwired as humans to solve some of these problems in real similar ways. So, when people get interested in, this looks like this form over here and this one over here, around the world, it's interesting to sort of test those connections and see if there's the possibility that people actually move from here to there. But what we find in a lot of cases is, what we describe as just independent invention, essentially, of these different traits. And,
right.
Large monolithic structures are things we find worldwide. And for a lot of these groups, especially way back, we don't have any reason to think that they necessarily were in contact with each other. But yeah, those are always interesting to explore.
Indeed. And I guess I think of the pyramids too, and some of the things that we see here in Central America and those similar shapes, right? It's the same type of thing that you're talking about, right?
Right, exactly. Building on a really large scale, for groups within the context of their own religion, their cosmology, and, building up into the sky. And this kind of circles back to what we've talked about many times before on the program, is, when you build durable monuments, particularly using stone, you're saying to the world and to your local area, as whatever the local leadership is, we have social power, we have political power, and we can build monuments that, will last for centuries, millennia. And
Sure.
that's really what we see. And, Chaco and great houses in our part of the world really are part of that long train. Again, not implying connection to other groups who build in stone, but just the notion that you can project political power onto a landscape, and building in stone is the most durable thing. I think if we compare stone monuments and wooden ones, because we know there's lots of ones built out of wood in the past, the wooden ones go away in pretty short order. I mean, in our part of the world, in the Southwest, we have a climate that allows wood to survive on the surface and in protected places, for long periods of time. Most places in the world, depending on soils, the wood tends to decay very rapidly. So even the form of Stonehenge in a hinge, which is basically just a circular, construction of upright stones, Stonehenge was preceded by different wood hinges, is what they're called. And these were upright post structures. And, we have examples of these in America that are much more recent in time. We've got them in Ireland, many other places in the world. But all we find for those wood ones are basically the post holes. So the areas that were excavated to then set the massive posts that went in. So yeah, it's, there's very interesting commonalities and differences as we look at these.
Very interesting, for sure. And I guess as you were talking about that, I was thinking about these structures that were built out of stone to last a long time, and these multi-storied structures, the pyramids, the other examples, the great houses at Chaco and things like that. They were multi-story, and I would think for folks living at that time to see something taller than they were, that wasn't a tree or a mountain or a cliff or something like that was man-made, would be pretty impressive, and would kind of project that power of the group that built it, right?
Right, exactly. And the other thing that this connects to is just the notion of central places on different landscapes at different times. So this is something that goes way, way back in human history, people building places to serve as social centers, as economic centers, as ritual centers, and as political centers, all these different axes. And of course, ultimately, as population centers as well. Once, people sort of made the transition from hunting and gathering several millennia ago, they started settling down, growing different food crops, raising animals, then, this notion of incipient urbanism of people settling in towns and what ultimately grew into cities comes on. So, humans are very focused on these central places, when we look into different societies around the planet.
Right. But it seems like religion or rituals had a big thing to do with some of these locations, correct? And we're still learning more about them as much as we can, but that seems to come into the conversation when we talk about Chaco. It seems to come into the conversation when we talk about Stonehenge, at least in my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but those were major components of those structures?
Right. Definitely with Stonehenge, there seems to be little question that it's a ritual center, that the rocks are set up to mark certain astronomical alignments, that they were very concerned with solstices, with equinoxes, with the movements of the sun and the moon, as well as other planets. Jumping across to Ireland and the site at Newgrange, similar thing. The Newgrange central tomb, the massive built tomb is pointed so that the sun on the winter solstice can rise and shine all the way into the back, down sort of a cross-shaped interior chambers, a series of chambers connected inside that tomb. And then, cremated folks were put into the different points around inside the Newgrange tomb. And one of the more interesting things that's come out of recent study is that, people's cremated remains were placed in with whatever ceremony, and then later in time, other people were introduced. So, as they've studied some of those remains, they've found a great mix of basically a whole lot of different people. So it's almost as though people at the time were allowed to put in cremated remains of an ancestor who could be in the special place for a time, and then it was someone else's turn. So the inference is that then some of those remains were removed and others given their opportunity to go ahead and jump in,
right,
as it were.
Right.
So Yeah, so a very important ritual place durably through time. And then, of course, in Stonehenge, as I mentioned, the recent findings of people being buried at different points around the monuments. And again, the assumption is, as people are buried in Christian churchyards and other religious places around the world, there's a consecration process. There's the importance of having, your ancestor buried in this very special place.
Right. Fascinating. Very interesting. Let me share a couple of the articles that you sent over to me, Paul Reed, as we talk about some of this interesting new discoveries and learning more about what we have already kind of learned about. But of course, in Ireland and in England, as I mentioned, Stonehenge has been there for a number of years. We've known about it, but here's an article you sent me from Live Science, to give them credit, about some drone flights that revealed another Stonehenge-like circular monument in Ireland. Is reading the headline verbatim off of the article. And so this has not been discovered before, and this is just a recent discovery, huh?
Right. So this particular passage tomb, and there's a series of them in this portion of Ireland, just to orient folks, this is just, basically 25, 30 miles north of Dublin. So on Ireland's kind of northeast, not quite on the coast, fairly close. And this seems to have been a very ancient, important ceremonial place. So we have tombs at Newgrange, a place called Noath, one called Doath. And as, archaeologists have spent more time on these, and with the ability to fly drones and do aerial mapping, it's been a huge breakthrough. They've found now, I think, 4 different hinges around the tomb at Newgrange. So these are circular structures with either stone or wood, in some cases both. And this again just reinforces the notion that this was an important ritual place going back thousands of years. The main tomb at Newgrange has been pretty well dated to about 3200 BCE. So this is 5,000 years ago, and preceded, the important, real erection of the large stones at Stonehenge by several hundred years, and a few hundred years, to orient folks, before the biggest of the pyramids were built over in Egypt. So, and there's really no connection between these groups as far as we can tell. But this move to build, again, large stone monuments is something that seems to be very much a part of what makes humans human.
Right.
And then to have those places serve as, tombs for special people, of course, in Egypt, the ancient kings inside there, and at Newgrange and Stonehenge, we're a little less clear on the societies. These don't seem to have been necessarily hierarchical kingdom type societies, but certainly leadership and perhaps, people from different families put into these places to have their time. So, yeah, really interesting. And then, of course, the connection to Chaco is not a cultural one, but the building of large monuments in stone.
Sure. Right.
But in Chaco's case, dwelling places, large great house structures where people lived, and certainly where important ritual activities happened. The main difference that I like to highlight for folks with Chaco is connected, through time to modern Pueblo people and historic Pueblo people. So we don't have to scratch our heads much about who the descendants of Chaco and the sites, across the Four Corners and across the Southwest. Those folks are still with us. As we look across the pond to Stonehenge, Newgrange, we're back many thousands of years, and we really don't know a whole lot culturally beyond the monuments and some of the other clues we have about who those folks were. They're well before we have any indication of Druids, in Ireland or England or any place. So, that makes a fairly interesting mystery. And then we seem to have people leaving these areas after these large monuments are built, and then other people coming in who didn't necessarily make use of them. So we definitely have, sort of the pattern we've talked about before, which is waves of people moving across different landscapes on our planet. And that, despite us having settled down many thousands of years ago into small cities and became larger cities, if you look at our million plus, 2 million plus, however long we want to go back, most of the pattern on our planet for humanity and human ancestors is movement through time, finding resources, setting up special places, but then moving on to others. So this notion of staying in one place is relatively new in our history, if we look at the whole span.
Right. Interesting. And when we talk about these, hinges that are being discovered and things like that, and even some of the work that's been done around Stonehenge. As you mentioned, this appears to be an area of gatherings. There's not a lot of indications, at least in the immediate vicinity, that there was housing, but I think there's been some wooden structures that may have been discovered not too far away that may have provided some type of semi-permanent population. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. That's what is interesting about these, if we want to call them ceremonial districts, is there aren't house mounds or, the foundations of different homes that are found in the immediate area. We have to go out, 2, 3, 4 kilometers or miles to get to where people seem to have lived. So that does suggest that these areas were set aside largely for ceremonial, religious, special activities. And that is a pattern that we see in other places. We tend to have the homes built back a ways, and in some cases kilometers away from where people are living.
Right. Fascinating.
Or where they're having their ceremonies, I should say.
That's right. And so with these articles, Paul Reed, tell me, so what would you assume or configure that these folks are looking for at these sites? With the one in particular, as we showed, of this looks like a field, and the drone footage is showing pretty clearly some depressions in the land, or at least some markings in the land that would show this. And so if you go in to excavate, what are they looking for? Are they looking for remains of a stone foundation or wood or all the above?
Right. And this one, I believe they haven't done that work yet, although, this trench was put in on a different site. But
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're looking for these large post holes that I mentioned, remains of wood. If the stones are still in place, and, from the aerial shot, it looks like the stones probably were not there. So I'm guessing more than likely this was what we would describe as a wood hinge. So they're going to go in, they're going to look for fragments of wood, which, if they're lucky, they will find some. And then they can take that wood, if it's big enough, do tree ring dating. If they're smaller pieces, they can do radiocarbon dating, and then get a sense of the timing. And this is one of the more interesting things about the way sort of these religious ceremonial precincts evolve through time, is it's more than likely that this newly discovered hinge, overlaps some portion of Newgrange, but it may be substantially earlier. They initially thought, I guess, with this one, that perhaps this was something more recent, in just the last several hundred years instead of thousands of years old. So, this is why we do the work. We come up with these ideas and say, well, this probably dates to this time, it probably dates to that time. But then, doing the test excavations, recovering samples, dating the wood, ideally, then they can get a sense of when it was actually built, and then connect it in the chronology to Newgrange and to some of the other hinges that have been found in the area. And then ultimately come to, again, what we're seeking, a better explanation, and ultimately a stronger narrative for what seems to have unfolded in this area.
Right. It's always amazing to me in a place like Great Britain and Ireland and Europe, places where there have been human inhabitation for thousands and thousands of years, and you think that every piece of land has been tread upon numerous times, and everything that's been discovered has been discovered. But here we are in 2021, 2020, still finding these new discoveries with technology and with the help of drones or other things, that they're even in a widely inhabited place like Europe, we're still seeing and finding new things to learn about our past.
Right. That's what makes it really exciting. The other thing more on the more recent side is, farmers in these different places routinely find caches of coins, Roman coins or other things that were set aside. They find people buried occasionally, in full regalia of the time. And, these end up, people get buried, hordes are buried with the riches of the time. The expectation is people are going to return and dig them up, and a lot of times they don't. So hundreds of years pass, guy's out plowing his field, and sure enough,
right,
the next hoard of coins pops up. So yeah, it is very interesting. And of course, humans like to live in the same places. Certain places have great soils, for example. They have resources that are available. And, in the case of, islands like England and Ireland, you don't have a whole lot of territory to begin with, and people have lived there for thousands of years. So you tend to build up, these pretty complicated sequences over time. but then the knowledge of the earlier stuff passes out of out of history, certainly out of people talking about it. You come to years later and the stuff pops up again. So yeah,
Right.
that is one of the more exciting aspects of the field, definitely.
For sure. And job security for you, I suppose.
That's right. I just need to get my visa and
That's
permanent
right.
residency
Exactly.
in Ireland, and then it'll all be great.
There you are. I want to show the other article that you sent too about, again, kind of continuing our conversation this morning. Again, from Archaeology, this publication from the Archaeological Institute of America, and the title is New Thoughts on the Origins of Stonehenge. And so what can we learn from some of this research that's been gone into this article?
Well, the story keeps growing, and that's what's really interesting. Some of the special bluestones that they've known about for a while that comprise part of Stonehenge, not even a majority, but an interesting part, had been tracked to a point location in Wales. Some dozens of kilometers away. So, of course, that takes us to, well, how do they transport the stones, which is,
Right.
continues to be an interesting question to pursue. People have kind of settled, at least in part, on the notion of, wooden sledges that were dragged by many, many teams of folks. But in this particular spot at Wales, they've recently found an example of a hinge, a circular structure of stone that is sort of interestingly incomplete in many ways, but made use of these same bluestones. It predates the main construction at Stonehenge, which, of course, Stonehenge has a very long history going back to 8,000 BCE in the Mesolithic. But what we think of as Stonehenge and the tallest part of the henge, and perhaps its peak, is about 2,500 BCE. So this one in Wales is a few hundred years earlier than that, and built of these blue stones. So the speculation is that folks in Wales built their henge, used it for a time, and then decided to move it, move many of these large stones all the way to Stonehenge and contribute to construction there. So yeah, very interesting pattern, and certainly speaks to the importance of these blue stones for these groups of folks, because it's a long ways to drag these very large stones. And the interesting thing about Stonehenge is it incorporates large rocks from different portions of England. So not just from Wales and West England, but from other areas around. So part of the interpretation there is that Stonehenge was an important ritual ceremonial center that brought people together from different portions, really across what we call Great Britain or the UK today. And so this little slice of it in this recent discovery at Wales shows that it had, this has been known, a precursor with a local group building a henge and then deciding, well, we're going to contribute our effort to the larger group, so let's shift some of it down there. So a real fascinating, interesting process. And of course, we don't have much information on this at this point. So this is definitely fertile ground for a lot of additional study.
Right. And again, I have to say, with all the studies that have been done about Stonehenge, I mean, that is the best known of all the henges, I would say, over all the years that we've been looking at Stonehenge and digging around Stonehenge and testing Stonehenge and all those different things, to still be able to discover new things about it, new theories about it, is just amazing to me and fascinating to me that this work continues and we keep learning new things.
Right. It's kind of a perpetual stay tuned, right?
Yeah, right.
We reach, I don't know, I think a certain point where we have understanding with the data we have in hand. We try to construct, realistic, reasonable narratives and say, this is what seems to have happened. Here's our data. We go through the scientific process, publishing, compiling data, have other researchers review it, reach a point, and then the next year something interesting is found. And a lot of times those discoveries don't overturn all the work that's been done. Sometimes we go in a different direction. Sometimes we do head in completely new directions. But the nice thing about that process, and we've certainly talked about this a lot, Scott, is science is cumulative, and there are missteps. Sometimes we have data that come up that don't end up fitting. People initially think they do fit. We have hypotheses, theories that are proposed, tested, sometimes rejected in the literature by the larger body of archaeologists working in an area. But we do see an advancement through time towards, what is ultimately a better understanding of these different places on the planet. So, and I think that'll happen with our understanding of Stonehenge and Newgrange and these other places as well. And it doesn't rule out that there could be a discovery next year or in the next decade that really changes some substantial part of what we thought we understood. But we sort of have to deal with what's in front of us. So.
Right, true.
And you have to put your best foot forward and say, here's what the data suggests to me or to my team of researchers. I'll test it out, have some people not connected to the project look at it. We go through that whole scientific review process. And even at the end of that, a lot of times there is substantial disagreement about what, these tiny bits of data might suggest about the reconstruction of a society from 5,000 years ago. So that is what makes it really interesting. It does have certainly an element of, frustration, sometimes. And I can imagine that people monitoring things in the public and trying to keep up on it do wonder if, what is causing the archaeologists or scientists in another field to say this on this day, and then a week later they say this. Well, the world has many surprises that it unloads on us. So, and what we're all committed to ideally is the idea that, we've addressed the questions we have right now. We're trying to do that, but that other things are going to arise and that we'll have better questions in the future as we look into things. So,
right.
Yeah. The story's never finished. And, I think that's a fairly good metaphor for looking at, humans on our planet for a million years, and especially the last several thousand. New things happen, we sort them out, we move on to that. So it's we're an interesting species.
No kidding. Very true. That's very true. Well, Paul Reed, we're almost out of time this morning, but I did want to ask you, there is a bit of an update with the Bureau of Land Management here in northwest New Mexico, and we've talked a little bit about this before as well with you on the program, and so a little bit of an extension to pass along, right?
Right. So we've been involved, and many groups have, in this process that BLM and BIA more recently to modify their long-range planning processes. We've been very concerned about protecting folks who live on the ground around Chaco and drilling areas, and just the amazing resources that exist outside the boundaries of Chaco. So, the Department of Interior under the Biden administration recently announced that they're going to extend this process for another year and give time for additional review and for some of the studies that are underway to reach a better point of completion, and then be able to revisit some of what they had suggested late last year. So others might look at this as, well, it's just another year, more government bureaucracy. But many of us felt that the process that was ongoing wasn't necessarily heading towards what we needed to balance the oil and gas with resource protection and protecting people who live on the ground out there. So I think having the additional time will let us do that, hopefully.
Right. Very good. Well, encouraging news, I think, for folks who want to make sure their voice is heard and review what's being discussed. So we appreciate the update. Thank you very much, Paul Reed.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
Good to have you here, and we'll talk again in about a month.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you so much. That is archaeologist Paul Reed from Selman Ruins and Archaeology Southwest, my guest this morning here on KSJE.
Google is changing the way ad tracking works, but can we really have privacy and targeted ads? From American Public Media, this is Marketplace Tech. I'm Molly